Imagine standing on a battlefield more than 2,000 years ago. There are no engines, no gunfire, no tanks, no fighter jets, only the wind sweeping across vast open fields and the distant sound of marching feet. At first, the sound is faint, barely noticeable, but with every passing second it grows louder, stronger, closer, until the ground beneath your feet begins to tremble. On the horizon, an enormous army emerges, thousands of soldiers moving as one. No chaos, no shouting, no one breaking formation. Rows of rectangular shields form a moving wall of iron. Sunlight glints off polished helmets and armor, making the entire force appear almost unstoppable. Then you realize this is no ordinary army. These are the Roman legions, the force that conquered much of the known world, the army that defeated fierce tribal warriors in the north, wealthy kingdoms in the east, and powerful rivals across the Mediterranean Sea. But what truly terrified Rome's enemies was not the number of soldiers. It was the weapons they carried. These were not simply swords and spears. They were tools designed to break an enemy's will to fight. Military innovations that were centuries ahead of their time. Weapons that transformed Roman legions into the most feared war machine of the ancient world. In today's video, we're exploring the most terrifying weapons ever used by ancient Rome. From javelins that could turn an enemy's shield into a deadly burden, to massive war machines capable of tearing down city walls from hundreds of meters away. But make sure you stay until the very end, because the final weapon on this list isn't a sword, it isn't a spear, and it isn't a siege engine. It's something that helped Rome dominate the world for centuries. And chances are, the answer will surprise you. So let's begin our journey into the most terrifying weapons of the Roman Empire. Pilum, the nightmare of every shield. When people think of Rome's most terrifying weapons, they usually imagine razor-sharp swords or massive siege engines. Yet one of the most effective weapons ever carried by a Roman legionary was surprisingly simple. It was called the Pilum. At first glance, the Pilum looked like an ordinary javelin, roughly 2 meters long. It featured a sturdy wooden shaft and a long iron shank ending in a deadly point. To Rome's enemies, it appeared no different from countless other spears seen throughout history. But that assumption often proved fatal. Before engaging in close combat, Roman legions advanced in tight, disciplined formations. When they came within striking distance, thousands of soldiers raised their pila at the same moment. Then they threw. For a brief instant, the sky seemed filled with flying iron. And then disaster struck. Unlike ordinary spears designed to be recovered and reused, the pilum had a unique purpose. When it pierced an enemy's shield, the long iron shank often bent upon impact. This made the weapon almost impossible to remove quickly. The shield became heavy, awkward, nearly useless. Imagine standing in the front line with only your shield protecting your life. Suddenly, a pilum punches through it. Then another, then another. Your shield becomes a burden rather than protection. You now have only two choices. Keep carrying the crippled shield and fight at a disadvantage, or throw it away completely. But without your shield, you're exposed to the advancing Roman legion. Either way, you've fallen directly into Rome's trap. And that's what made the pilum so terrifying. It wasn't merely a weapon that wounded enemies. It was a weapon that destroyed their defense. While enemy warriors struggled with ruined shields and collapsing formations, Roman soldiers surged forward. The sound of marching feet grew louder. The distance closed rapidly, and within seconds, the real killing began. Their opponents no longer had solid formations. No reliable protection, no time to react. Many modern military historians consider the pilum one of the smartest battlefield inventions of the ancient world, because it attacked more than the enemy's body. It attacked their confidence. In a matter of moments, warriors who had felt safe behind their shields suddenly realized that protection was gone. And as fear began to spread through the ranks, Rome unleashed its next weapon. A weapon that helped conquer millions of square kilometers of territory, and became one of the most iconic symbols of Roman power. The legendary sword known as the Gladius. Gladius, the sword that conquered the world. After the pilum shattered enemy formations, Roman legionaries immediately moved into the most dangerous phase of battle: close combat. This was where every mistake could cost a life, and this was where Rome's most famous weapon revealed its true power: the Gladius. Compared to many legendary swords throughout history, the Gladius appeared surprisingly modest. It measured only about 60 to 70 centimeters in length, much shorter than the swords carried by Celtic warriors, Germanic tribes, and many other ancient peoples. To most warriors of the time, a longer sword meant a greater advantage. The Romans disagreed. They understood something many of their enemies did not. Victory doesn't belong to the biggest weapon. It belongs to the most effective one. The Gladius was specifically designed for fighting inside the tight formations of a Roman legion. Each soldier stood shoulder to shoulder with his comrades. A large shield covered most of his body. In such cramped conditions, a long sword was often cumbersome and difficult to use. The Gladius, however, was perfect. A Roman soldier only needed to open a small gap beside his shield. Thrust, withdraw, return to a defensive position. Every movement was quick, efficient, precise. What made the Roman approach even more deadly was their training. Unlike the dramatic sword fights often seen in movies, Roman soldiers were not taught to rely on powerful slashing attacks. They were trained to stab, again and again. Roman commanders understood that a slash might wound an enemy. A thrust to the abdomen, chest, or lungs could end the fight instantly. That simple principle shaped the entire Roman military system. Day after day, month after month, year after year, legionaries practiced with wooden swords against heavy training posts. These posts were often heavier than an actual human opponent. The goal was not elegance. The goal was efficiency, to build strength, speed, precision, and muscle memory. By the time a Roman soldier entered a real battle, his movements had become almost automatic. Imagine facing not one skilled swordsman, not 10, but thousands. Thousands of soldiers using the exact same technique, thousands of shields advancing together, thousands of short swords thrusting forward from behind an unbroken wall of protection. No hesitation, no wasted movement, no opportunity to recover. This was one of the reasons so many armies collapsed when facing Roman legions. Not because they lacked courage, not because they were weak, but because they were fighting against a military system engineered for efficiency, a machine built for war. And at the heart of that machine stood the Gladius, a weapon that helped Rome dominate battlefields for centuries. Yet, despite its terrifying effectiveness, the Gladius had one major limitation. It could only kill enemies who were close enough to reach. The Romans wanted something more. A weapon capable of eliminating threats long before they could engage in combat. A weapon that could strike from hundreds of meters away. A weapon so precise that many historians compare it to a sniper rifle of the ancient world. That weapon was called the Scorpio. Scorpio, the sniper of the ancient world. When most people imagine ancient warfare, they picture massive armies crashing together with swords, spears, and shields. But many battles were decided long before the two sides ever met. And few civilizations understood this better than Rome. Roman commanders knew that if they could eliminate key targets before the fighting began, they could weaken an enemy army before the first sword was drawn. That idea led to the creation of one of Rome's most terrifying weapons, the Scorpio. At first glance, the Scorpio looked like a large crossbow mounted on a sturdy frame. But appearances were deceiving. This was one of the deadliest long-range weapons ever deployed by the Roman military. The Scorpio used twisted bundles of rope made from animal sinew or human hair. When tension built inside these twisted cords, enormous amounts of energy were stored. With the pull of a trigger, all that force was released in an instant, launching a heavy iron bolt at incredible speed. Unlike ordinary arrows, Scorpio bolts were much larger and heavier. They could punch through armor, pierce shields, and in some cases, pass through multiple men standing in line. But raw power wasn't what made the Scorpio truly terrifying. It was accuracy. Historical records suggest that skilled Roman operators could hit targets at astonishing distances. In an age without gunpowder, That level of precision was revolutionary. Imagine you're a general standing safely behind your army. You believe you're out of range. You believe you're protected. You're issuing orders, preparing your troops for battle. Then suddenly, a sharp whistle tears through the air. Before anyone can react, a steel bolt streaks across the battlefield, and everything changes. No warning, no chance to dodge, no second chance, just one deadly moment. That was the fear the Scorpio brought to the battlefield. Roman armies often positioned multiple Scorpios behind their lines or on elevated ground. From there, they targeted the most important individuals in the enemy force: commanders, standard bearers, elite archers, anyone whose presence could influence the outcome of the battle. As these key figures began to fall, confusion spread rapidly. Orders stopped reaching the front lines. Formations broke apart. Morale collapsed. And that was exactly when Roman legions struck with maximum force. Even more impressive, the Scorpio wasn't limited to open battlefields. Romans mounted them on fortress walls, watchtowers, and defensive positions throughout the empire. Anyone approaching Roman defenses risked becoming a target. To Rome's enemies, the Scorpio felt like an invisible assassin. You knew it was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. But you never knew when the next shot would come. And yet, despite all the fear the Scorpio could create from a distance, there was something even more terrifying. Something that made entire armies and cities feel utterly helpless. Because sometimes Rome's most powerful weapon wasn't a machine at all. It was the Roman soldiers themselves, united together as a living fortress known as the Testudo. Testudo, the moving fortress that broke the will of cities. Throughout history, city walls have been considered the ultimate line of defense. Massive stone walls, reinforced gates, towering watchtowers filled with archers. Everything was built for one purpose: to keep the enemy out. For many ancient civilizations, retreating behind city walls offered hope. As long as those walls remained standing, survival seemed possible. But when the enemy was Rome, things were rarely that simple. Because the Romans developed a tactic so effective that defenders often found themselves watching in horror as their enemy advanced meter by meter, completely unstoppable. It was called the Testudo, or, as it is more commonly known today, the tortoise formation. Interestingly, the Testudo wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It had no blade, no arrows, no massive stones crashing through the air. And yet it became one of the most feared battlefield innovations in Roman history. Because it transformed an entire unit of soldiers into a nearly invulnerable moving fortress. When given the command, Roman legionaries quickly assembled into an incredibly tight formation. The soldiers in front raised their shields to cover their bodies. The men on the sides formed protective walls. Meanwhile, the soldiers in the center and rear lifted their shields overhead. Within seconds, dozens or even hundreds of men merged into a single armored structure. From a distance, it looked like a giant tortoise slowly crawling across the battlefield. And much like the shell of a real tortoise, it was designed to withstand attacks from almost every direction. Imagine standing on top of a city wall as an archer. You see the Roman army advancing toward you. Immediately, hundreds of arrows are released. Normally, such a barrage would devastate an attacking force. But against the Testudo, most arrows simply struck shield after shield, harmlessly. You order your men to throw spears. The result is the same. Then massive stones are rolled from the walls above. A few soldiers may stumble, some may be injured. But the formation continues moving forward, slowly, relentlessly, without stopping. And that's what made the Testudo truly terrifying. Not its physical strength, its psychological impact. Defenders began to realize that their most trusted methods of protection were failing. Minute by minute, the Romans moved closer. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed beneath the walls. The distance shrank, confidence faded, and helplessness took its place. Many military historians consider the Testudo a perfect example of Roman military thinking. The Romans didn't just want to kill their enemies, they wanted to destroy their hope. Because an army that loses faith in victory often collapses far faster than an army that simply loses soldiers. And once the Testudo had carried Roman legionaries to the base of a city wall, another terrifying weapon took over. A weapon capable of smashing fortifications, crushing towers, and unleashing destruction from hundreds of meters away. A weapon that many historians describe as the artillery of the ancient world. The ballista. Ballista the ancient, weapon that made cities tremble. If the Testudo allowed Roman soldiers to reach the walls, the ballista was the weapon that brought those walls down. In the ancient world, city walls symbolized security, power, survival. Entire kingdoms spent decades building massive stone fortifications designed to withstand invasion. For the people living inside those cities, the walls represented hope. As long as they stood, resistance was possible. But when Roman armies arrived with giant ballistae, that hope began to disappear. At first glance, the ballista looked like an enormous crossbow, mounted on a heavy wooden frame. But beneath its simple appearance was one of the most advanced war machines of the ancient world. Like the Scorpio, the ballista relied on twisted bundles of rope that stored tremendous amounts of energy. The difference was scale. Everything about the ballista was larger, more powerful, more destructive. When released, its mechanism could launch massive bolts or enormous stone projectiles across incredible distances. And when those projectiles struck their target, the results were devastating. Imagine standing atop a city wall. Far below, Roman engineers are preparing a strange machine. For a moment, everything is quiet. Then a sharp roar cuts through the air. Seconds later, a massive stone slams into the wall. Chunks of masonry explode outward. Dust fills the sky. Before anyone can recover, another projectile comes crashing in. Then another and another. Each impact feels like the blow of a giant hammer striking the city's defenses. But the ballista wasn't used only against walls. It could also be aimed directly at soldiers. Its massive bolts were powerful enough to pierce armor, shields, and sometimes several men at once. For defenders, every launch brought a new wave of anxiety. No one knew where the next projectile would land. No one knew who would be struck next. And that uncertainty became a weapon in itself. Because Roman warfare was never just about destruction. It was about breaking resistance, breaking morale, breaking the belief that victory was possible. Over the centuries, ballistae played a crucial role in countless Roman sieges. They opened paths through fortifications once thought impregnable. They turned mighty walls into rubble, and they helped Rome expand its influence across continents. Yet even the ballista wasn't Rome's most surprising military innovation, because the next weapon didn't dominate battlefields, it dominated the sea. And it helped Rome defeat one of the greatest naval powers the ancient world had ever known. A weapon that transformed naval warfare forever, the deadly boarding bridge known as the Corvus. Corvus, the weapon that changed war at sea. Before Rome became the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, it faced a serious problem. On land, Roman soldiers were among the finest warriors in the world. At sea, they were beginners. Their greatest rival at the time was Carthage, a maritime superpower with centuries of naval experience. Carthaginian sailors were highly trained. Their ships were faster, more maneuverable, and far more experienced in naval combat than anything Rome could deploy. During the early years of the Punic Wars, many believed Rome had little chance of defeating Carthage on the open sea. If Rome fought by traditional naval rules, defeat seemed inevitable. But Rome possessed one remarkable advantage. Whenever they encountered a weakness, they found a way to change the game. And that mindset led to the creation of one of the most ingenious military inventions of the ancient world, the Corvus. The name means crow in Latin. And much like a crow swooping down on its prey, this weapon struck suddenly and decisively. The Corvus was essentially a large wooden boarding bridge mounted on the front of a Roman warship. At the end of the bridge was a massive iron spike shaped like a bird's beak. When an enemy vessel came close enough, Roman sailors would release the bridge. The heavy spike slammed into the enemy deck and embedded itself into the wood. In a matter of seconds, the two ships became locked together, And that was exactly what the Romans wanted. Traditionally, naval battles depended on speed, maneuverability, and sailing skill. Those were areas where Carthage excelled. But once the Corvus connected two ships, those advantages disappeared. Suddenly, the battle was no longer a naval engagement. It became a land battle fought on floating platforms. And that was where Rome truly dominated. Roman legionaries rushed across the bridge and stormed onto enemy vessels. The fight that followed was exactly the kind of combat they had spent years mastering. Shield against shield, sword against sword, discipline against chaos. For the Carthaginians, it was a nightmare. They had spent generations perfecting naval warfare. Yet Rome had found a way to turn the sea into an extension of the battlefield. A place where Roman soldiers felt completely at home. Time and time again, Carthaginian crews found themselves overwhelmed by heavily armed legionaries pouring onto their decks. Ships were captured, crews were defeated, and victories that once seemed impossible began to fall into Roman hands. Many historians believe the Corvus played a critical role in Rome's rise as a naval power. Without it, the outcome of the Punic Wars might have been very different. Without it, Rome may never have gained control of the Mediterranean. And without control of the Mediterranean, the Roman Empire as we know it might never have existed. But after exploring the Pilum, the Gladius, the Scorpio, the Testudo, the Ballista, and the Corvus, one question still remains. What was the most terrifying weapon Rome ever possessed? Surprisingly, the answer isn't a sword. It isn't a spear. It isn't a siege engine. And it isn't a warship. The real answer may be the most unexpected of all. The most terrifying weapon of Rome wasn't a weapon. After looking back at all of Rome's most feared weapons, from the shield-breaking Pilum to the deadly Gladius, the precise Scorpio, the unstoppable Testudo, the destructive Ballista, and the revolutionary Corvus, it would be easy to assume that one of these inventions was responsible for Rome's success. But the truth is far more interesting. None of these weapons alone could have built an empire that lasted for centuries. None of them alone could have conquered vast territories stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. What truly terrified the ancient world was something far more powerful: discipline. Discipline transformed thousands of individual soldiers into a single fighting force. Discipline allowed Roman legions to hold formation while arrows rained down around them. Discipline kept them advancing when others would retreat. Discipline enabled them to execute complex tactics under the chaos of battle. And discipline turned brilliant inventions into unstoppable weapons. The Pilum worked because soldiers threw it together. The Gladius worked because soldiers fought as one. The Testudo worked because every man trusted the shield beside him. Everything depended on discipline. For centuries, when Roman banners appeared on the horizon, enemies weren't simply afraid of Roman weapons. They feared the system behind them. A military machine operating with ruthless efficiency. A machine capable of adapting, learning, and overcoming almost any challenge. That machine helped Rome build one of the greatest empires in human history. And even today, military academies around the world continue to study the principles that made Rome so successful. So now we'd like to hear from you. Which Roman weapon do you think was the most terrifying? The Pilum, the Gladius, the Ballista? Or do you agree that discipline was Rome's greatest weapon of all? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the military secrets of ancient Rome, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps support the channel and allows us to bring you more fascinating stories about ancient empires, legendary battles, and the hidden secrets of history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.